start cleaning up this Gen mess. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Abby Medcalf to the Gen Mess with Tess. Abby Medcalf is a relationship maven, psychologist, author, podcast host, and TEDx speaker who has helped thousands of people think differently so they can create connection, ease, and joy in their relationships, especially the one with yourself. With her unique background in both business and counseling, she brings a fresh, effective perspective to life's struggles using humor, research, and her direct, no-nonsense style. With over 35 years of experience, Abby is a recognized authority and sought-after speaker at organizations such as Google, Apple, AT&T, Kaiser, PG&E, American Airlines, and Chevron. She's been featured expert on CBS and ABC News and has been a contributor to the New York Times, Women's Health, Psychology Today, Fast Company, Well and Good, Bored Panda, and Bustle. She's the author of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, Be Happily Married, Even If Your Partner Won't Do a Thing, as well as the newly released Boundaries Made Easy, and the host of the top-rated Relationships Made Easy podcast now in over 170 countries. Welcome to the show, Abby.
Welcome. It's so good to be here. It always sounds like my mother wrote that, so that's great.
Well, thank you so much for being here. So share with us a bit about you, your background, your journey, how you got to where you are. I know 35 years it's been a long journey.
It has.
And with a lot of experience. So
yeah, I basically, in a nutshell, I am a recovering heroin addict and from New York City. And I got myself, through the sobriety journey, I really found, counseling, which isn't that odd. A lot of people do that. They go through rehabs, and many for me, and then they sort of get into the counseling world. And I was in the counseling world for a while, and doing drug and alcohol work, and then have been doing this shift for many years now, where I then worked in the business world for a long time. So went through an MBA, and then got my PhD in organizational psychology, and I have a master's in counseling psychology. So I have sort of an interesting background of this kind of unique blend where I've worked in businesses with executives who had drug and alcohol problems. And then which I still do. And then I have, this other world where I sort of do straight counseling. So it's become like a counseling coaching approach. And I've worked in hospitals. One of my early jobs was riding in the back of police cars to help prostitutes sign up for healthcare, so I've done that, I've worked in drug rehabs. I've worked in a multitude of businesses, schools, you name it, probably I've worked there in some way, which all sort of culminated, about 10 years ago or so of me really being in my own, doing private practice, which I do now, still working with executives and companies or teams. And then, doing the podcast, which I've been doing for 7 years now, and growing that. So there's just been, there's been a lot that got me here, but here I am.
What I love about what you do, because you really focus on relationships. And I remember this very well when you said, well, my ultimate goal and mission is world peace. Yeah. So let me backtrack a little bit. How do I get there? Yeah. And I think that that's so brilliant. This idea of, it is our relationships. Like, how do we get to world peace? Oh, okay. You're absolutely right. So I would love, could you tell us a little bit more about that? How did you have that aha? Was it an aha moment like Oprah?
I wish it was like Oprah. No, I come from a family, we marched for civil rights, and it's not that odd to be a Jew from New York and be very kind of politically active in trying to help people. So that's sort of, what I was raised in, very much like very integrated household, very much about how we can help people, even though I didn't grow up with much, people we've had even less. And so, that's always been my mission in there somewhere, and hence working at nonprofits and profits. And then all the research points to, all of it points to that a happy life ultimately is a result of your relationships. One of the most important decisions you'll ever make is who you partner with, to have children or to partner with long-term. That is probably the most important decision you ever make, because it will really be a happy life. I always think of Sandra Bullock winning the Oscar, but her home life was crumbling because her husband at the time, Jesse James, I think his name was cheating, and it was very public and out there. And later in an interview, she said she, of course, she'd give up 10 Oscars to have had a happy marriage, right? So you can be at the pinnacle of your career, but if your home life sucks, you're going to feel miserable. Whereas if work sucks, but your home life feels safe and wonderful and secure and so good and supportive, guess what? Work doesn't going to feel as bad. So it's really important. So my idea was, if people were happy in their relationships, they wouldn't hate, there wouldn't be bigotry, there wouldn't be racism, there wouldn't be a lot of things. If people were truly happy in their own skin, and when I say, I hate that word happy, but content, satisfied, connected, feelings full of joy and ease and connection, when those are all operating. So my idea was, I could change the world one relationship at a time, because every time I change someone, or helped, I don't really change them, but when they change themselves through the tools, they're then different to their kids and to their partners. And then those people are different to the people around them. Right. And you get this beautiful domino effect.
Yes.
So that's how I see it. So that's my jam. And so I do tell people, I'm like, hey, if you support me, or if you just, pass on an episode of the podcast to somebody who could help, you're part of the change too. You're part of helping people change how they are and who they are.
Yeah.
And, I want to live in that world.
Yeah, because and what you're speaking to is something that's so important, because I think we think this, we are self-involved creatures. So we're always thinking about ourselves, but we don't spend enough time thinking about, how am I impacting the people around me? Yeah. How is my presence when I walk through the door of my home or my office, how is that affecting other people, or how will it affect other people? Now, you obviously can't control what, other people's feelings, but yeah, if you decide to walk through the door with a horrendous attitude, it's not going to be good.
Affect. Yeah. It's interesting, because one of the things I'll hear from people is they'll say, well, I was in a good mood, and then my partner came home in a bad mood, and then I was in a bad mood, or I was great, and then I went to work and everybody was negative, and so I got negative. And my reaction is always the same. Why? Why is it assumed that your good mood will be overshadowed by a bad mood? Why aren't you bringing people to where you are? Why is it just a given that if somebody's in a bad mood around you, then you're in a bad mood? And that's really about taking responsibility. And I would say that that's one of the bigger issues between the generations, is of taking responsibility for how you feel and not blaming it on others. And I will say that, when you come from, who are above the boomers, the
silent generation.
The silent generation. Thank you. I'm like, what is the name of the generation is perfect, because they were silent. You never said how you felt. You never said what was up. You just put your head down. You're going through the depression and wars, and you are just doing what's in front of you. There is no pursuit of happiness, really, in a way, right? And certainly there's no talking about how you feel. Most people don't even know how they felt, right? And I think that, the pendulum obviously can swing too far in different ways, right? And I think that happened in some ways here in our different generations, where the kind of boomers who came out of that are then raising, like they're starting to think, oh, what do I need? Who am I? Like, I feel this way, or and again, the silent generation was trying to give, it was the idea, especially in the United States, that every generation would do better than the one before. Yes. That you would sacrifice so the one next, then after you could do even better and even better. That was the whole idea. And that's not so true anymore. Not because people don't intend it, but because it's not really possible in the same way, unless you come into great wealth, already. But that idea, but with feelings and relationships, right? And I think boomers then really got, in some ways, very into their own stuff, and into their own, like, things that they had, and wanting to have a certain life and spend their money a certain way. And then, you have kids who you maybe are trying to treat very differently than you were treated. So you're giving, everything. And I mean, so all the decision, what do you feel? And how would you like to do this? And so many questions to them. I didn't grow up age-wise. I'm on the cusp of boomer and Gen X. I'm that year right in the middle, right? But I grew up with all much older siblings, and I grew up with older parents. And so I really grew up kind of boomery.
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. But I also grew up feral. We were told to leave the house in the morning, and I was
Yeah.
in that generation. Like, I don't want to see you till 6 o'clock, and it's time for
Yeah.
dinner, like that kind of stuff. So, so I get kind of both, the really working hard for what you want, and just having that there, and then also this other thing. But I think being on that cuff, I can kind of see both very well. Like, I feel a lot of Gen X and I feel a lot of
Mhm.
Boomer. I can really relate to both very, very easily. And there's really every generation has a different way that they treated feelings.
Mhm.
Right. And
Yes.
like when you think of Gen X, what do you think of when you think of their feelings?
Well, that we were always thought of as this independent, I always think of that song "Killing in the Name of," like, "Don't tell me what to do,"
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So,
Right.
it's okay to have feelings, but not that
Who's
much.
really listening?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of part of what, Gen X was, the whole joke about how there were ads on TV telling our parents that,
Yeah.
I remember the ads, right?
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah,
10
it's
o'clock,
10
you know where your
PM.
kids are. I mean, it's so funny because I think about my own children are Gen Z, they're 18 and 21, and I think about how I knew, especially with iPhones these days, where
Yeah.
people are every second of every minute, right?
Yeah.
And having a phone on you, and and all that stuff. It's so ubiquitous now, and it's in a very short period of time. I mean, I'm not that old, and it's really such a jump in how we are looking at kids, how we treat them.
Mhm.
I even remember we were not allowed to drink coffee. That was like a grown-up drink. That was not, and
Mm.
I grew up with European parents, and it was still like like the coffee pot was like this special thing that you were not allowed near. It was like an adult
Really?
drink. Yeah. And so, and I
Huh.
think that, but as those generations have gone on, coffee, my 18-year-old drinks coffee all the time, like
Yeah.
it's such a different, observation, way that we interact with even things like a drink, like
Mhm.
kids are so much less protected in some ways and overprotected in others, I think.
Yes. Yes.
It's really, I mean, I'm sure you find that too. Like, you talk about this.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm reading the Jonathan Haidt book,
Oh, The
Anxious
Anxious
Generation, which
Generation.
is
Wow.
making me
So
anxious.
good. Yes.
But what he speaks about to that, and I thought he brilliantly, which is that and I too have a Gen Z kid, for these Gen Z kids, right? We have been way too overprotective in real life with zero oversight in the online life.
Yeah.
And as a parent, it's very easy to take that personally or think like I've done something wrong. But the reality is, it just was a couple of years ago that the Surgeon General came out and said, hey, maybe these phones might not be good for kids. And
Right.
and there's a whole generation that got these phones at 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
And so that part's very hard as a parent now, because I think a lot of us, myself included, are kind of overcorrecting now for, oh, wait a second, I need to be a little bit firmer about real life. I need to be more pushing you out into the world a bit more in real life. And I need to be more aware of what you're doing online. But
Right.
this is all new. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the thing about technology, is it's very much the wild, wild west, and it
Yep.
continues to be.
Yep.
For sure. So what do you see? Because you've worked with a lot of different generations. And so in the time that you've worked, what do you notice about, I would love to hear about what are the similarities and what are the differences. So what's the similarity across, no matter who you've worked with in the generations?
People want to be liked.
Mhm. Interesting.
That is the similarity of everyone is still looking for the same thing. They're looking for people to like us. We're looking to belong, to feel like we're part of something. We are looking for connection. We are looking for true connection with someone. We're looking for that person who has our back. We're looking for our tribe or our community or whatever you want to call it. That has never, ever changed. That is across the board. And even, Gen X, who I think people would consider the most like on their own kind of generation of all those, they still have their people. I mean, my God, they still have like, their group around them. Right. So I think that has never changed. And that's something to really notice. What's changed tremendously is how we deal with that. Right. How we deal with that. So I think we've gone from, well, I'll be liked and I'll be whatever if I'm a good person. Right. For a lot of people, that was religion or going to mosque or church or temple or whatever you did, and you have community there, and you would go on your sports at school and you'd have community there, and maybe you'd have your neighborhood friends, and maybe you would have your there was communities everywhere. Parents had community. There was a lot of ways that people came together. And again, when you even think about, I'm always like, every time I drive by this one bus stop on my way to work, and there's always about 10 people. I usually count. There's somewhere between 8 and 12 people lined up, and every single person is staring at a phone.
Oh, yeah.
Every single one is just, no one's talking to each other. And that is not how I grew up, right? You would sit there, you'd know people who were just at the bus stop you were at. Like, you would chat with them. You had no choice. That's what you were doing. You were standing there. Occasionally people would I usually carried a book around, so I'd read a book a lot. But you didn't walk and read a book. And people will walk with their phones all the time and run into people and whatever. It's amazing, like, how there's not any there. Shelley Turkle from MIT writes about this a lot in her book Alone Together. And how there's a lot of studies, I forget her name, from University of Miami, who does all these studies at airports where people are not talking to each other. Airports used to be a place where everybody would talk and hang out and chat, and like even if you were with your partner, you would be sitting and talking to them as you're waiting for your flight or whatever. You'd be talking to neighbors there. Maybe someone's knitting or someone else is maybe reading a book, but pretty much people would just be sitting, having a snack, whatever, and talking. And that has not happened. Now there's less and less actual talking at an airport because people are all on their individual devices somewhere else instead of where they are. Right. And so that's, to me, the big change has been for me. And when I work with people, and that's in business or personal or wherever, is that this idea of wanting to be liked has shifted, I think, dramatically down to like Gen Alpha, I would say, where people have become so conflict avoidant. I think that's the biggest problem right now, personally. Conflict avoidance, without a doubt. And people don't even realize, they're fish who don't even know they're wet. They don't realize how bad they are at it and how much it's important to them. I mean, I think I have clients who won't cancel on the phone or even on email, I have a client who had getting her eyebrows done. She wouldn't cancel the appointment. She was too embarrassed to it was a conflict. Like, she couldn't do it. She couldn't cancel the appointment. So she would just not cancel and not show.
Oh, she just no-show.
Go find a new place.
Oh my God.
Like, that's literally what she would do. And you know what? I have other people who do the same thing.
Yeah.
In different ways.
Yeah.
But, this is like, I'm calling DoorDash and I'm having them leave the food at my door. I don't even want to say hello to somebody. Like, I don't even want to just leave it outside. We've become so adept at not talking to other people that we've lost this skill, because it's a skill and you learn it and you refine it for yourself, of talking to people. I find that people will say to me, well, I want to tell them this, but how can I do it so they don't get upset? Like, that's the number one question I get asked of all the questions from every generation, I would say. How do I give someone my boundaries? How do I tell them I don't like this? How do I whatever without them getting upset? That is people's number one goal. And it's like, you've got to be kidding me. That can't be your number one goal. Number one, it's impossible, because you can do it perfectly. We both know this. You could do something so perfectly, every single thing Abby said to do or Tess said to do, and the person can still get upset. Of course they can, because that has nothing to do with you. Yeah. Someone getting upset or not has nothing to do with you. So this idea that we could control other people, that if we just did it right, all this perfectionist stuff comes out. And so that leads to not doing it at all, to complete avoidance. So I don't even know if it's just conflict avoidance. It's just avoidance, like, of everything. And then we end up with things like bed rotting. We end up in really scary places. This idea, I mean, I really think about how little time I spend in my bed, right? Except to sleep. That's the only time I go to bed, right? Maybe you go there if you're having some afternoon sex, right? But and that's like when you're in your bed. But when I talk to my kids, or I talk to half my clients, people are in bed a lot. Yeah. Like, a lot. They're doing their whole life from their bed. And it's just an interesting, it's such a shift. And I don't even know, I can't, it's not to judge. It's just to notice. It's like, wow, this is so different. Is this good? It doesn't feel good. I don't know. Yeah. It feels, again, like a retraction. And again, if we know that our relationships are the source of our happiness, of our contentment, of our joy, what are we doing? I know that you're not having intimate relationships in your bed alone. Like, that's not, I don't care if you're having, phone sex with someone. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
That's not, that's not true emotional closeness is what I'm talking about
Yes.
when I talk about intimacy. So, other people need to be there for that. And can you do that with a lot of distance? I don't think so, personally. I think you can have some. I think you can have some different, but
Mhm.
there's something about an in-person for those kinds of relationships that I think is really important. And so it's interesting. What do you think?
Well, I'm curious though with the conflict avoidance, and I absolutely agree with you. And there's such a thing where we talk about these younger generations and they struggle the most with anxiety. And right, what's the what's the thing that you do when you're anxious? You avoid.
Yeah.
And what do you need to do when you're to get over your anxiety? Stop avoiding.
Yeah.
Like do the things that are scaring you. I'm very curious when you talk about this, the conflict avoidance. Do you notice that just with the younger generations, millennials, and Gen Z, or do you have baby boomer clients that are also in that same headspace?
Many fewer baby boomers, I will tell you that right now. Some of that's just because they've aged. As you're older, you're like, screw it. You stop caring so much. You really do. But I believe it's very related. How conflict avoidant you are or whatever, to me, is very related to your self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I find is that people with low self-worth spend a lot of time thinking about what other people are thinking. And people with high self-worth spend a lot of time thinking about how other people are treating them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to me the big difference. So like I focus on how people are treating me. What they're thinking, I can't control. I'm not saying I don't care at all, because of course we all do a little, but I think I can say, my daughter said this years ago. She said, well, you have to care what other people think, but not worry about it. And I know, teenager at the time, I thought, well, that's brilliant. I wish I had come up with that. I hate that I have to give her credit, but I do. But it's true, right? So you want to care, like, I care, but I can't worry about it. So I want to be kind to my presentation. I want to be, know that I'm in alignment and doing the right thing for me and not coming from a place of fear or hate or something like that. But other than that, I can't control what you do or don't do or what, and that's all the boundary stuff I always talk about. But there's a real... But when our self-esteem is in a good place, we're really focused on not what are you talking about me behind my back, or are you, no, we're not focused on that. We're like, how are you treating me right now? Is it with respect? Is it, in a really direct way that I appreciate and want, and that's what I'm going to call you out on, or that's what I'm going to talk to you about. And I find that, again, people with higher self-esteem will I don't think of it as calling people out. I think of it as calling people in. So I do want to say that, like, I think you should have that attitude that you're calling people in. You're trying to connect with them. You want to make a connection. And I think everyone thinks as soon as I say something to someone, I'm pushing them away, or and it's like, no. That doesn't have to be at all. But again, as we get to generations that are worse and worse with this, then I have people who were told something and like never went. I have a client I'm working with right now who was a teacher kind of said something in class to her, like, oh, I don't think it's that, like, when she told me what it was, it felt pretty benign, but like, I don't agree with what you wrote, or tell me more about why you wrote that, whatever. They were all having like a open discussion in her class. She never went back to the class.
Wow.
She was mortified. She said she was so embarrassed she could never go back. That to me is very problematic. That is like a brittle self-esteem, that's so on the rocks that you can't handle someone just saying, I'm not sure what you wrote is what I was asking. But I think, and then that makes you withdraw more. So now you're really not learning, you know what I mean? And like you said, you have to do the thing that scares you a little bit. You have to go back. And so that's what worries me more. There's more and more ways to separate ourselves. So there's more and more way. It becomes easier and easier.
I think that what's hard about these younger generations when it comes to relationships is that because of technology, they really have not had to learn how to invest in relationships, and invest in a way where you have to keep showing up. You have to keep, I use this example a lot, but back in my day, right, you meet a friend for the movies, and if you're going to blow them off, you can't. There's no way to reach them. So you would have to show up. You would have to be there. And so the problem was that today it's so easy to flake. it's so easy to just text
Yep.
and be like, I don't feel like going. And guess what? The other person's thrilled that you canceled.
Yeah, right.
You know, I mean, there was once a time in my life where people canceling plans was very upsetting.
Yes, I
you
agree.
know, but now it's just like, oh, thank God I don't have to do this thing. And so that's the part that is, and I'm not blaming. I think that this is the thing, is that I think the younger generations feel like they've been pointed out or blamed for these things. And it's got nothing to do with blame.
Yeah.
It's really got to do with, okay, this was a skill that we didn't realize that we all really needed, that we were learning and didn't know that we were learning. Oh, whoops. When we took it away, when we gave you this device that made it very easy for you to quote unquote connect, that we didn't realize, like, oh, all these other skills are going to go by the wayside. But that is one of the biggest things today, is that people don't, because they don't have to invest in the relationships in the same way, they don't appreciate the relationships in the same way. Back to that, right? Like just the person with the teacher, you know, maybe it's almost like whatever this teacher taught her didn't matter.
Right.
You know, there was like, no.
Right. Yeah. But, it's, I think that people get very caught up in, you know, what am I getting out of this now? You know, like, what am I getting out of this now? Like they want to, let me say that better. It's like they don't know what they're really looking for. Let me say it better. I think they don't really know what they're looking for because they haven't had it yet. So for example, I have to ask clients all the time. They'll say to me, well, I was talking to this guy, we've been talking for like 2 months, and I'm like, wow. And then he like ghosted me, they'll say. I'm like, wow, you were talking for 2 months? And I find out they were texting for 2 months.
Yes, that's what
that is not talking. There's no, you haven't talked to that person ever. It's like the fact that you're calling it that it is problematic.
Yeah.
Just there. That's what I mean. Like they don't even know what it is that they're supposed to be having. Do you know what I'm saying? Because everyone else is doing that too. Yeah. So, and everyone else is, you know, so there's an odd, like, I feel like there's no examples of what they want almost, or they're not seeing it because they are home. And the people that aren't doing that are out and are doing it, but they're not you know, it used to be that even if you were an introvert or whatever, or anxious, you still had to be out in the world. Because there was no choice. Like it just was what it was. Do you know what I mean? And now it's so easy. It's even, you know, you can find jobs that are remote. You can really, it used to be like, if you had to like support yourself and you were an introvert, guess what? You had to get out and go to work. Yeah. Like you didn't have a choice. And now it's like, oh, maybe I could figure out something I can do remotely. Yeah. Right.
And you can keep avoiding.
I can keep avoiding. And it just, so it's like you haven't actually experienced it and how joyful it is and how wonderful it is. You haven't gotten all the good stuff. So all you know is this sort of medium stuff. And you're like, I don't miss that. Like it's nothing. I'm not super invested in the relationship. Like I've never had the full thing. So I don't even feel the lot. So I don't know. It's just not much. It's like if I'd never had an Oreo cookie and I'd only ever had, you know, plain cereal, I'd say, I don't like sugar, you know, or had some low, you know, Honey Nut Cheerios. I might be like, I could take it or leave it. But if I'd had Oreos, you're like, oh, I love these things. I want more, you know? I mean, but I feel like we have a generation of people who've never had the Oreo. Like they don't even know. So it's very easy to say, I'll just stay in bed. Oh, I'm glad they canceled. Yeah. Do you know, and then a bunch of them are meeting each other who don't have the skills. So even when they're on the date, it's awkward, or, you know, when they're first meeting, it's awkward and they're not quite getting it. Yeah. So what do you, I'm just going to go right into, because here at the Gen Mess, we like to solve the generational problems. Right. What do you think? I mean, in terms of romantic relationships, what is the solution? What should these generations be doing? And I think the other question too is there a way in which they can be supported by their parents? I mean, things that I would love to know something that great thing a parent to say to their kid about getting them up and out of the house too. But let's start with the first question. So the first one is, what should they be doing? Right. I would say try it for a month or a week or a day, depending on how hard this is for you, but completely get off of your, everything, your tablets, your thing, and see what that pushes you to do. Because it might just push you to go for a walk because you're so bored. You might finally walk your dog. And guess what? If you're walking your dog without staring at your phone, you might meet someone. You
Mhm.
might talk to someone, you might make eye contact. This is what I do with my clients. I was like, you are not allowed to touch your phone or take it anywhere with you. You have to leave it in the car at work.
Mhm.
I'm serious.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be on your tablet, no social media, complete detox, because you will be starved for some kind of something. It's like
Mhm.
social media is giving you like the worst. There's no nutrition, but it's filling you up. It's cheese
Yeah.
doodles. You know what I mean? You're eating a bunch of cheese doodles, which are very satisfying in the moment and do nothing for your overall health or weight or anything, right? So, but that's what that is. And it's filling like a hole, sort of. And I mean, we've got research on it now. Hate talks about, I mean,
Mhm.
right? It's so bad for you. So just to not give yourself that option for a little while and see what you're just see. I tell my client, and they're like, well, what do I do? I'm like, I don't know. You'll find out. See what
Yeah.
it draws you to do. I had one client, finally went to get like some art supplies to try to like
Yeah.
do some art. But at least you're at a store buying that, because I said you can't buy anything online. You can't.
Mhm.
You have to go grocery shopping yourself. Like door dashing. Like
Mhm.
every of those conveniences for a week, a day, a month, however long, just start a little detox
Mhm.
and see what you're pushed to do. And you will start to find yourself in situations where, I'm telling you, every single, not occasionally, but every 100% of the time, even my clients who are very anxious say that it felt better, even if it was brief.
Mm.
So, I mean, I have some pretty anxious clients, as you can tell from things
Yeah.
I'm saying. Some of them have freaked out about this, and
Yeah.
they always come back grudgingly. Not day one, not day two, not day three, but soon. And they go, it was actually kind of nice. I walked the dog. It was actually, they talk about seeing things they'd never seen before. They're like a minute from their house, like real. I mean, it's kind of, they sort of laugh at themselves,
Yeah.
like, oh my God, there's a whatever right up the street. And then I tell people, and try some kind of community something. So instead of online dating, do those meetups, do
Mhm.
the speed dating things in person,
Yeah.
do something. I'm not saying you can't go back to online dating or something, but I think you always need a break from that anyway.
Yeah.
Try in-person things, because those people are more invested, and those are your people anyway.
Mhm.
They're invested. They've gone out. They're actually showing up for something.
Mhm.
Definitely join some sort of sport or something locally if you're into that. If not, I don't care if you play Dungeons and Dragons, go do it in person instead of virtually. Like anything that you can shift into your local game store or into your,
Mhm.
I know this is harder for people in rural areas, but it's not impossible. Go to church. If you never been
Mhm.
to church, go to temple, do whatever. Like, do something you haven't done. Go to your local Buddhist temple and see what they're doing. Go to your
Mhm.
local Zen center, see what's up, try something new. Like, there's always, every town generally has something that's equivalent to like Time Out in New York City, like something
Yeah.
that tells you what's going on. Try something. Try anything. Again, start with a walk out the door with your animal, and sometimes having a pet. I've had a lot of clients I've had get pets,
Mhm.
because it forces them out of the house every
Oh
day.
yeah.
Forces
And you
them
will
to
meet
walk
your
out.
neighbors, trust me.
And you'll meet,
You will.
and they'll love your dog. They'll know your
Yeah.
dog's name before yours. And it's so much easier because you don't feel like the center, your animal does.
Yeah.
And it's such an easy conduit, and it really will force you, and it's raining and it's whatever, but you'll have to leave your home. You've got to take them out to run, to poop, to pee, to whatever. And it's going to help you get in the habit of leaving your home. So those are my that's it. Just
Mhm.
do that and you'll be amazed. You don't have to think different. You don't have to go to therapy for 10 years. You don't have to shift your medication. Just try that. Start there and you really will be amazed.
Be out in the world. It's funny. My husband and I went to see Chris Rock about 6 or 7 years ago. And one of the things that it said on the tickets was, don't bring your cell phones. And so Steve and I, we dutifully didn't bring our cell phones because obviously he locked them all up. This is very common now for comedians to do this.
I saw Kevin Hart recently who did that.
Yeah. And, but I remember because we had to wait in this very long line and the two of us kept kind of like, we have to talk to each other. Okay.
Yep.
But it was this very interesting thing of just having these two Gen Xers having to kind of sit with, oh, okay, we're talking to each other. We're observing, we're looking, look at us. And we didn't die.
Right.
And guess what? We didn't get lost. We figured out how to get back to our hotel. We didn't need the phone. We were okay. But I think that now they have become they are our safety blanket. They are our, pacifier. They are this thing and the idea of letting it go, that just feels so scary because you're going to have to sit with the nothingness.
Yes.
The nothingness of, and
Yep.
what that means, that level of discomfort. And it's almost it's interesting because the younger generations, they are so adverse to conflict or any kind of discomfort, but
That's it. Yep.
their ways in which they have thought they've been soothing their discomfort is actually making their discomfort even worse.
Yep. Yep.
And that's the part I think that where things have to change. So what do you think in terms of, you're a parent of your kid isn't launching.
Yep.
Is that the same? Do you encourage parents to have these same conversations with their kids?
I do.
Yeah.
I would also say though, number one, you've got to make it harder for your kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just so easy. I'll tell you that, like, my daughter finally bought a car with her own money. There's number one. I didn't pay for a car. She had to buy it. But beyond that, I remember she, a light came on. She was asking, and she called me, and it was a missed call. And I was like, huh, but I was busy. And by the time I got back to her, she said, oh, but I remember you said, like, cause she didn't get me. And I'm glad, cause I just would have told her, go figure it out. But I've told her, go figure it out enough that she knew to go figure it out. Even though her impulse was to call me, she was like, oh, there's that manual in the car. Let me look it up, the light. Let me see what that means. And she had already called the mechanic, like at 17. Mm-hmm. And that's how I raised my kid. I was like, if they could do it, I didn't do it for them. I was constantly getting them to think for themselves, to, take initiative for things. My son does not have a driver's license, who's 21. And I will tell you the reason he doesn't is because I've never pushed it. I'm like, you don't want one? Good luck. I'm not going to drive you everywhere though. And I'm not going to pay for Ubers. So you'll need to figure it out. And he has. God bless you. Good for you. Like, I don't have to have any attachment to him having to drive because my boundaries are good with what I will and won't do for him. I think most parents, their boundaries are poor and they see their kid in pain. And that's always painful for us to see our kids in pain, as we know. And I do want to say that this is harder with kids who have severe mental health issues or other things. So I do want to say that to any parent out there. Like, I get that, but I think most parents do not have a kid with a significant mental health problem. And they are still doing for them what they should do for themselves. I have been in session with a client who said, oh my God, my son is calling, and took the call in their therapy session, and told me, oh, I have to call AAA for my son. His car broke. And I was like, what? Like, that is crazy that your child, who, by the way, their kid was 24, 25, was calling the parent because the car broke down. You have created a very unhealthy something in that relationship. I'm not saying it's all unhealthy, but if you have never way before said, here's your AAA card, when you have trouble, call me after, call me if you're scared, call me, but to then call AAA I was like, I gave her the riot act. I'm not going to lie. Like, I was really like, this is not okay. This is so unhealthy. And it's mostly because it's so unhealthy of what you're doing for your kid. I heard Dr. Amen the other day, Daniel Amen.
Yeah.
The other day, it was so good. He said something like, every time you do something for your kid that they could do for themselves, you are stealing their self-esteem for your own. You're making yourself feel better at the expense of your kid feeling better about themselves. And boy, he said it better, but it was good. And I was like, yeah, that happens a lot. And I'm a Jewish mother, please. I am so uncomfortable when my kids are uncomfortable. And I've had to deal with that a lot. And then I go call my best friend and I complain to her and I talk to my partner about it. I have lots of other places I talk about it, but not with my kid. I let them suffer, to a degree, obviously.
Yeah. And you're sitting with that discomfort that you're feeling right in that moment. And I think what's so hard about this with parents and parenting today is that so much of this was a slow burn, right? Where baby boomers wanted to have a different relationship with their kids. They had those silent generation. They didn't want to keep holding their feelings in. They wanted their kids to have a place to talk. They wanted to give them all rewards and treats and, all of those kinds of things. They didn't want to do that. And so then that happened. And then my generation, we're raising these Gen Zers, and we were this feral generation that no one paid attention to. So we very much were like, because I dealt with a lot of stuff. My parents were divorced when I was young, and parents on a Greyhound bus when I was 11, stuff that I never imagine having my kid do now, but it felt too much. We felt like we were thrust out way too fast.
Sure.
So what happened was that we really backtracked and we overcompensated. I can only speak for myself, overcompensated, wanting to, provide more of that safety and comfort that I didn't get from my family. But the problem is that because of the phones, it's too easy. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because that's the thing. Even if we didn't have the phones, that AAA thing, that person would have had to figure out how to get to hopefully a payphone.
Well, we used to have payphones, but yes.
Yeah, but all of those same things, because when I was in college, my parents were 3,000 miles away, a different time zone. I could, if I was out and about, how could I would have to call my parent where? At work?
Yeah.
Maybe if I could get a hold, and one I could get a hold of, the other one I couldn't. And then, that's the thing. So you were automatically forced to do some of those things. And that's why I just want to all the parents out there listening, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You did not cause all of this, but, and at the same time, myself included, we have to shift and change how we are parenting these kids, knowing all of these things that we know now. In the world that we live in, because technology is only going to get more and more and more. I mean, it's silly to think like, oh, well, we won't have these phones anymore. It's like, no, these devices are going to be around. I think that it's just right. It's a matter of how will they change? How will it evolve?
And I would say to any brand new parent or people who are listening, who are, more like, do not introduce, I see little kids with phones, like, my kids were fine at Target without a phone, not that we're at Target anymore, but like they'll be okay. Yes. I know that you think you have to entertain. It's this idea of entertaining them every second. I have a lot of parents with young kids that I work with, and they just are entertaining them constantly. Yeah. And the kids are expecting it, because that's, I have to have something going on all the time that someone else does for me. As opposed to them being on their own and using their own imaginations, right, to create things, etc. So just be aware. I keep thinking of, I have one of my brothers. My mother had issues when he was born, and he never crawled. He went right from sitting to walking. So he skipped this very important, and you think, well, what does it matter? Great, he went from, and now he's walking. Why do you need to crawl? Well, guess what? He had a lot of trouble learning. He had a lot of trouble reading, and it's absolutely related to that. The muscles, the wiring that happens in the brain, right? When you're crawling, when you're doing all that, that's a important evolutionary step for every child to take, and it's meant to be there. It's the whole thing, with the butterfly. If you cut it out of the cocoon, it dies because it needs to struggle to get out. That's the point. So it builds the muscles that are going to be its wings so it can fly away. So like that struggle, that part where it's hard, is important. And those different developmental steps are really important. So when you interrupt those steps, of imagination, of kids being free, Haidt talks about this, of actually having a childhood where there's something more there that they have to do. When you're constantly I would even say that. I even did if my kids asked for a glass of water or something and they were too little, to get it, I would say, sure, in a minute. Like, even if I was next to the water, I always was thinking of delayed gratification, I didn't want to be a drug addict like me, so it was like delayed gratification. It's funny when I think about it, because I'm kind of a boomer who raised Gen Z. Like, I skipped generations in there because I had my kids when I was much older. And so I think that also, I did enough work by then and therapy by then that I sort of kind of had a better grasp of how I wanted to parent. And so, not that I'm telling people to wait so long, but I think being educated, though, like I was educating myself without realizing it, I do think there's a lot to be said. Like, don't read every parenting book. I think it gets crazy, but I think there's some important reads, like The Anxious Generation Right Now, like Mindset by Carol Dweck. Like, I think there's some really important books that are research-based that are great to read, to really have a better understanding of their brain development. I think of Nurture Shock back in the day, there's just some really good books that will help you understand that they're not little adults, even though they act like it.
Yes.
They're kids. So, and that's an important distinction.
Yeah. It's striking that so much of this is about balance, because people ask questions all the time about, like, what's the solution to this? Or how do you fix this? And it's always, I think, that very therapist-y answer of, well, it depends, and it's a balance, and it's a balance of a little bit of both. But you're absolutely right, which is it's this balance between showing up for your kid and making them feel safe and secure so that they have that attachment and that nurturing feeling, so they're not scared all the time, but also not solving everything, allowing them to have some level of discomfort.
Yep.
And what's hard is that what the level of discomfort, your discomfort versus what your kid, so much of that's hard versus what society says discomfort should be versus what you think discomfort should be. Yeah. Well, I had a lot of other questions. I have so many other questions, but tell everybody how they can find you. Tell us what you've got going on, all that good stuff.
All that good stuff. My website's the easiest place, which I know you'll link to there. It's abbymedcalf.com. It's with a D, not a T, but you'll spell it. And everything is there. My podcast is in its 7th season, and we're not, it's doing really well. And there's a lot of things. My books, I just came out with the Boundaries Made Easy workbook, which just got published. And so there's a lot of, but there's a lot of free resources there, which I think a lot of people can connect to, and always a lot of actionable steps for whatever you can imagine that you want to know in relationships, be that work or whatever kind they are, or home or kids or parenting or whatever. Or just the relationship with yourself. And there's always some action steps you can take, because I'm with you. I feel like without the action steps, I'm not sure what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Abby's podcast, Relationship Made Easy, I send it to clients all the time. I'm always telling them, hey, check out these episodes. And I can't tell you how many clients will come back to me and say, my husband and I, or my partner and I, we're listening to Relationships Made Easy in bed together. And we're and then we think this.
That makes me so happy. Yay.
So, and it's great because you don't just cover romantic relationships, you cover friendships, and you cover work relationships, which we didn't get a chance to get into today. But so many of these things are right. Absolute. Because I'm sure what you've seen with all the clients that you work with, people that are struggling in their work relationships are probably struggling in their personal relationships. I've yet to meet someone who had great personal relationships, but couldn't make any friends at work. So there's definitely a correlation between all of it. Right. So, well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for tuning in to the Gen Mess with Tess. Remember, we're fixing the Gen Mess one conversation at a time.